What's up, you guys? My name is Griffin, and I'm a senior UX designer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been working as a UX designer for a little over 5 years now, and I've worked on some really exciting projects up to this point. But today, I want to revisit the project that pretty much landed me my first full-time job as a UX designer when I was straight out of college. I'm going to go in depth about what made this case study stand out and what made it captivate my interviewers and ultimately helped me land that job offer. So before I jump into the case study, this is what my current portfolio looks like. At the time that I was interviewing for my first UX role, my portfolio was actually just a Notion page with my personal domain connected to it. But since then, I've redesigned my portfolio in Framer. I just mentioned this because there are so many different ways to build and host your portfolio online nowadays, using platforms like Webflow, Squarespace, Wix, and many more. So don't worry too much about which platform you use, just focus mostly on your case studies and the content within them. And with that being said, let's jump into the case study. So we're going to be looking at this Deliver Smart mobile app case study right here, which was one of my first projects and, like I said, got me my first full-time UX job. So first off, although UX case studies are about documenting your design process through writing, visuals are also going to be your best friend for giving a clear impression of what you designed, especially for an audience like recruiters who are going to be scanning through your projects very quickly. So I start off my case study with a preview of some of the final screens for this project to hook the reader and get them interested to learn more about what went into creating these screens. Then the first section of this case study is the background. This is where I give the reader a brief introduction about what the project is and what sparked it in the first place. It was a final project for my UI UX design class in college, and because I had experience in gig work for multiple different companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats, I had an idea for an app that could unify earnings and driving data from all the gig work apps into one place. So I described that in the overview section, and then I jump into the problem statement. So this part is crucial in your UX case study because it sets the foundation for your entire design process that you're going to be describing. It clearly defines the issue you're addressing, the users affected, and the impact of the problem. So mine was, how might we simplify the process for gig workers to accurately track and calculate their earnings and expenses across multiple platforms? So it's clear, to the point, and gives the reader a good understanding about what I'm going to be designing. So now I'm going to jump into the key stages of this design project, and this is going to take up the majority of your case study. And these exact stages will vary depending on your UX project, but for mine, I kicked it off with doing user research to understand who I was designing for and how I could go about designing a solution for them. Developing a couple user personas was a big part of my user research phase, so I included those as visuals down here. Once I understood my target audience, my next step was jumping into Figma and designing some low fidelity wireframes. Some people skip this step, but for me, especially if I'm not working with a design system, this helps me roughly lay out the building blocks for my designs. You could also include visuals for these lo-fi mockups in the form of sketches if that's how you prefer to create your lo-fi wireframes. I personally did mine in Figma and then included a screenshot of them right here as a visual. Next, I go into the high fidelity mockup section where I describe my process of going from lo-fi to hi-fi and continuously testing with my users along the way to create new iterations. I also mentioned that I made dark mode the default for my app based on user feedback. Something my interviewers were looking for when I was interviewing for my first job was that I could incorporate real-world user feedback into my design process. So be sure to emphasize that in your case studies too. Next, I go ahead and detail two of the main screens within my app to give the reader a better understanding of how this app is used and what kind of insights it could provide. The first screen is called Analytics, which is a page for viewing earnings by time across multiple apps. And the Trip screen is for viewing mileage data, which can be used for tax purposes, for example, which I found would be a pretty common use case when I was talking to my end users. Once I designed all my mockups, I linked them all together to create an interactive prototype in Figma. And this ultimately let me do more usability testing with my users. And I not only include a visual of what all those links look like in Figma, but I also included a link to the prototype so that the reader can test it and see it themselves. If you have any resources like this that you can add links to in your case study, I highly recommend doing that. Next, I describe what my user testing phase looked like, the insights that I gained from it, and how I iterated based on that feedback. And on the left here, you can see I included a GIF of just some navigation throughout the app to give the reader a better understanding of how the app works. So this was pretty much the last part of my key stages part of the case study. And then I go into the impact of my app. Even though this was just a conceptual app design, I talked about how the design solves the problem that I mentioned in the beginning and why it would provide value to users. You can see right here I included kind of a realistic mock-up of what the app would look like in real life. And it's not perfect, but if you can include any types of graphics like this that makes your app seem more real, especially if your app design was never implemented, this is really helpful to include too. The final stage of my case study was the takeaways section, and here I talk about what I learned from working on this project and how I came away from the project as a more well-rounded designer. And that is it for this case study. This was the case study that pretty much helped me land my first UX role that I had for 2 years. UX case studies really don't have to be that complicated. And from the interviewer's perspective, it just needs to be understandable and show that your design process makes you a valuable UX designer. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos about UX and product design. Also, if you have any questions below, drop a comment or shoot me an email, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.